Our last speaker is Michael Williams. There we are. Michael is General Counsel of the American Suppressor Association. Who is one of our sponsors today, so thank you for that. He's also one of the founders of ASA. Michael was in the White House for 2 years in the Office of Management and Budget. He was in the West Wing for a year. I actually saw a picture of him sitting next to the president one day, which I thought was pretty cool. You know, I'm a little more famous just stepping near him here. He was Deputy Assistant to the President and Counselor to the House Chief of Staff during the previous administration. So with that, I'll let him take it over so he can tell us about silencers and the Second Amendment.
Actually,
Thanks so much.
Williams is gonna go first.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it over to Knox, who's my brother and also my boss at the American Suppressor Association. We have a serious deal. We don't usually do deals at the ASA, but we got a really good deal.
Yeah, first off, just want to say thanks to George and Fire and Research Center for hosting this. This has been pretty amazing. You know, for the first time having a law seminar focused on the NFA. Obviously, this is something that we've been myopically focused on for the better part of 14 years. As an association, but it's really neat to see this kind of come to the forefront. Thank you all for your scholarship and your willingness to push this issue set forward in the legal sense. The American Suppressor Association, we are a nonprofit, but we're also a membership organization. And anybody, whether in person or online, that's interested, we'd love to get you as a member. And we're doing half-off memberships across the board for any member set. We've got the code for it is FRC event. You just got to go either on the QR code if you're here, you can scan it, it'll take you right there, or asamember.com. It's asamember.com, and yeah, we appreciate the support.
So yeah, like Knox said, thank you so much for having me out. Thank you so much for hosting this. Hopefully this is the first of many, because this has just been such an incredible event, and I'm obviously you've saved the last for last. Definitely not the best, but here we go. So what is a silencer? In non-technical parlance, a silencer is often called a suppressor, a moderator, a muffler. We call them in the industry a can, but a silencer does not, in fact, silence the report of any firearm. That's just physics. That's not how the physics works. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. So where did they come from? We've hit on this a little bit in some of our previous presentations, but gentleman by the name of Hiram Percy Maxim patented the first silencer in 1909. He had actually invented it a few years earlier. And in his own words, the Maxim silencer was developed to meet my personal desire to enjoy target practice without creating a disturbance, right? So he was not a fan of loud noises across the board. This is a man who invented the muffler for the firearm, but he also helped invent the muffler for the internal combustion engine. He had a decently long business inventing building silencers, so silencing things like heating and air conditioning systems. Basically anything that requires fire to create it, you can muffle it with a suppressor, with a muffler. He marketed suppressors as a way to shoot without noise. And in many ways, suppressors were a victim of their own marketing success, which as has been noted in some of the previous sessions today, helped contribute to their inclusion in the NFA, right? And here you can see a few ads from the 1900s, 19-teens, where Hiram Percy Maxim was marketing his silencers. You know, as has been noted before, they range from $5, $6, $7, decently cheap item, especially as compared to that $200 tax that would be coming on soon. And again, that marketing success, I mean, you almost have to give him credit. That marketing success has lasted well over 100 years, right? When the general public thinks of a silencer, this is what they think of. I mean, almost anybody ask, if they're not, even in the gun industry, even in the gun Second Amendment community, they think suppressor, they think, you know, somebody out in that room over there could be, you know, assassinating someone and nobody in here would know the difference, when in fact, that's just not what they do. Again, that's not how the physics works. From there, I was going to go into how they got included in the National Firearms Act before I get into the technical specifics of what a silencer is and isn't. So I'm going to go through this very quickly because it's been hit in several of the previous sessions. But obviously, NFA was FDR's attempt to ban guns. Originally, it included handguns. Handguns were removed from the NFA. You know, that original version of the NFA only applied to handgun suppressors. It did not apply to suppressors of any other type of firearm. However, thanks to likely some poor legislative drafting, they got thrown in and included just like SBRs and SBSs, which is, an unfortunate quirk of history. That's a theme that I've seen throughout Second Amendment history, at least in the last century or so, is bad things happen in the world. Congress passes bad, poorly drafted laws, and we all have to live with them. And we're still living with some of those mistakes from 1934. So obviously, the NFA applies to suppressors, machine guns, SBRs, SBSs, destructive devices, and AOWs. We'll go through that again pretty quickly. We've got to register them. I think this is all well-trod ground in this conference. And again, the statute has essentially been the same since 1934. Originally, the Treasury Department was tasked with overseeing compliance with this statute, which makes sense since it's in the tax code. In subsequent decades, that enforcement was moved over to ATF, and that's where it still sits today. And as has been noted, the tax stamp revenues go to the general fund. They don't go specifically to any other item. They certainly don't go to ATF. In the suppressor world, we live in one of the most highly regulated industries, I think, in the country. This has been hit in some of the previous sessions also. But again, every time a suppressor is created and moves to that next step, it requires either government notification by the manufacturer or by the interested party, or government approval, right? So I manufacture a suppressor, as been noted. That's just a notice. That notice goes within 1 to 2 business days to the ATF. If I want to move it over to distribution, I have to get affirmative okay from the ATF to move that to the distribution. If it moves from distribution to dealer, again, we need another okay from the ATF before we can move that. And again, so you'll see that my slide is a little bit outdated. This is from about a year ago. Obviously, in the last 9 months, we've had significant downturn in the average wait times from 9 months down to, I think I looked today, and according to Silencer Shop's tracker, we're at 7 days for both trusts and individuals, which is again a sincere thank you to ATF and Ben for making that happen. That's huge, but highly regulated. Where is a suppressor defined? It is not defined in the NFA, as has been noted also earlier. It's actually defined in the Gun Control Act as any device for silencing, muffling, or diminishing the report of a portable firearm, including any combination of parts designed or redesigned and intended for the use in assembling or fabricating a firearm silencer or firearm muffler, and any part intended only for use in such assembly or fabrication. So that's what the federal government thinks a silencer is. What are the facts? What does a silencer actually do? So here is a diagram of essentially a cutout of a suppressor. Now, there are several new technologies that might look a little bit different than the exact specs of this one, but this is generally speaking how a suppressor works, right? It is a tube, an outer tube that contains an internal series of baffles that trap and cool propellant gases. So what does that really mean? So where does the sound of a gunshot come from, right? Just like in an internal combustion engine, it happens when that flame ignites air, that those hot gases from the flame hit cold air and expand very rapidly. That expansion comes along with noise, and it's a whole lot of noise. I'm going to get into the specifics there. We had a noise thermometer over there, but I've got a slide that'll hit that here in just a second. Just like with an internal combustion engine, you're never going to get it silent, right? You can just trap those gases for a little bit longer, let them cool a little bit longer before they hit the very cold relative air. Think about a balloon again, right? So if I blow up a balloon, I've got my full balloon right here. If I pop it, all that air expands immediately and we hear a nice long noise, right? And it's loud. If instead I slowly release the air, you're not going to hear a sound, right? That air is moving a lot slowly. It's the same, a lot more slowly than if I pop it. It's the same same physics apply to both of those scenarios. It really isn't rocket science. It's basic physics. What is why would I want a suppressor, right? So if they're not going to actually silence my gun, if I can't be running around silently assassinating people, what is the benefit? The benefit is hearing protection, right? And here is an audiologist take on it, which is that the most serious threat to hearing comes from recreational hunting or target shooting. And why is that? Because in this country, we regulate the hell out of loud noises, except in this space. In this space, interestingly, the federal government and many state governments want to actively make it harder for you to protect your hearing, whereas in most every other application, the federal government and NIOSH limit the amount of noise you can actually be exposed to. How loud are we talking? I mean, almost, it's hard to really wrap your head around how loud we're talking because, like I said, you're not going to be introduced to noises that are as loud as a gunshot in America in 2024. And here we go, another professor of audiology lays it out and says that the level of impulse noise generated by almost all firearms exceeds the 140 decibel peak at sound pressure level limit recommended by OSHA and NIOSH. It is not surprising that recreational firearm noise exposure is one of the leading causes of noise-induced hearing loss in America today. And again, I'm going to throw a bunch of these quotes at you because I don't want you to have to take my word for it. I obviously have a point of view. I am general counsel of the ASA. I am very much a suppressor advocate. These are folks who are in charge of protecting your hearing. And a side note here, as I mentioned, Knox and I are brothers. When Knox originally started the American Suppressor Association in 2011, there was no, he did it because there was no other group that was actively promoting suppressors on a legislative level. Knox wanted to be able to hunt with suppressors in Georgia. That was illegal at the time. He wanted to change it. But why did he like suppressors so much? Well, our mother is an audiologist. So I grew up in a household where, you know, every time I put headphones on, I was getting that I better not be able to hear it or you're damaging your hearing, right? Like it was drilled into my head at an early age that loud noise is bad for your hearing, and your hearing is it's one of your 5 senses. It's very much worth protecting. There's a reason you're advised not to look into the sun, right? Because what you're doing when you look in the sun is, it's not even a question. You are damaging your eyesight. I mean, the exact same thing applies when you're talking about pulling the trigger on a 30-06 out hunting without hearing protection. It's not a question of whether you're damaging your hearing at that point. It's a question of extent. And here we go. This is the noise thermometer that I was mentioning earlier and that we've got some copies of. We could probably give out if we had to. You'll see on there that above 140, really the only things that are up there are gunshot sounds, because you're not going to find much else that is that loud that you can be exposed to. And I'm going to get here in just I believe my next slide is actually an explanation of what decibels are. But the short version is that this is not a linear scale. Decibels are logarithmic. So every increase of 3 decibels represents a doubling of the sound pressure level, right? So the difference between 120 and 130 is something along the lines of 10x louder than rather than, you know, what you would imagine just looking at that of like 8%. That's not how these numbers work. Like I said, they're logarithmic. So this is unbelievably loud noises. And what does the suppressor do? Generally speaking, a suppressor is going to pull your noise level down by about 30 decibels, more or less. Interestingly, that's also what earplugs and earmuffs claim. Their noise reduction rating is often rated, as is noted down here in the bottom right, at between 20 and 35 decibels. So that's the manufacturer claim. However, if you really get into the weeds there, you'll notice, you talk to any audiologist, right? That's in a lab setting, not in a real world setting. In a real world, getting you somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 decibels of attenuation when you use them. Unlike a suppressor where you're going to actually reduce the noise at the source, much like a muffler. A muffler doesn't work by, you know, requiring me to put on a muffler on a car doesn't require me to put in earplugs to then turn on my car. It's doing that work at the source where the noise is actually created. So again, this gives you a good understanding of that. That 30 decibel increase is 1,000 times louder than it would be at 0. That's just, these levels are hard to really wrap our minds around. We think as humans in linear terms. This is logarithmic. It's just very loud. CDC 2011. So this is under the Obama administration. The only potentially effective noise control method to reduce students or instructors' noise exposure from gunfire is through the use of noise suppressors that can be attached to the end of a barrel. Again, and in your hierarchy of controls, of engineering controls, you always want to reduce the noise at the closest to the source, and a suppressor is the only way to do that. NIOSH in 2014, again in the Obama administration, if feasible and legally permissible, attach noise suppressors to firearms to reduce peak sound pressure levels. National Hearing Conservation Association. Persons wearing conventional hearing protection are not without risk of noise-induced hearing loss when using firearms. Therefore, NHCA supports the use of firearm noise suppressors as a form of an engineering noise control to reduce hazardous firearm noise exposures. So why are what is it about earplugs and earmuffs that makes them not actually hit that general 20 to 30 decibel reduction? Just think about the fact that from an engineering perspective, you've got humans involved, not machines, right? Your two types of typical hearing protection are earplugs and earmuffs. Earplugs, if you've ever put those in, and all of us in here have probably done it. I mean, if I'm doing it myself and I've been doing it a while, I'd say, maybe half the time I get a good seal where I can really feel it go in there. I can feel it fully expand. Anytime it hasn't fully expanded and really gotten all the way deep in your ear, such that you can almost not see any of that earplug anymore, you're not doing it right, and you're really definitely not hitting that 30 decibels of reduction. With earmuffs, again, what are, another one of our pieces of personal protective equipment when we're shooting is glasses of some sort or another, whether it's your glasses like mine, because I can't see, or your range glasses. When I've got these on, if I put on earmuffs, no matter what, I'm going to have at least 4 or 8 spaces where those earmuffs are not getting a proper seal to my head. I've got even more because I've got a beard, I've got some hair up here. All those spaces are letting in noise and keeping those earmuffs from actually protecting my hearing to the greatest extent possible in a lab setting. You're just never going to get that 100% lab setting, in the real world. It's not possible. Whereas with a suppressor, as long as it's affixed correctly to your firearm, you're more or less going to get something close to that noise reduction rating. Now, there are variables there as well. You're going to get the highest amount of attenuation with a bolt gun, for instance, because in an AR or something else, the action is allowing some gases to escape through the ejection port. But again, it's going to get pretty close to the actual stated noise reduction rating. So suppressors are hearing protection. It just is what they are. For every 5 years of hunting, hunters become 7% more likely to experience high frequency hearing loss. I mean, it's just endemic among the hunting community, because how often in real life you're out there sitting in the stand for 6 or 8 hours and that perfect buck comes along, and you've needed for those 6 or 8 hours to have situational awareness, to be able to localize sound. You're not sitting up there with earplugs or earmuffs in. You're just not. And once that adrenaline kicks in, you've got that shot right there. You're, very likely to forget to put on your hearing protection if it's not affixed to the end of your firearm. And again, there's statistics to back that up. 70 to 80% of hunters never wear hearing protection. Who in here is a hunter or has hunted? And who in here has used hearing protection every single time you've pulled the trigger? Yeah, 2. I mean, that's awesome. That's as it should be, right? Hopefully.
Sorry for the interruption. So we're talking about hunting dogs, right? Hunting dogs do experience noise-induced hearing loss. Dogs in some instances have better hearing than we do. And when they're around gunshots, just like us, they lose that hearing. You're not really going to effectively mitigate that at the animal ear level. There are products that maybe could do that, but, a suppressor is the only way, again, to mitigate the effects or the possible downsides of high exposure to high decibel levels at the source. So again, what are some benefits of suppressors? Hearing protection, home defense. Think it's, the home defense application is the same as the hunting application, except almost amplified, because you're likely in this, terrible scenario, you're pulling the trigger indoors. And I'll get to it here in a little bit when we talk about the case, but A Glock 17 being set off inside, that's about 170 decibels. That's pretty 160, 170 decibels. That's pretty close to the noise generated by a flashbang, right? It's going to be disorienting. You're inside. You're not only disorienting yourself, but also your family. You're putting their hearing in danger by pulling the trigger inside the house without a suppressor. So they really do have a very serious home defense and self-defense application. Safer hunting, again, for all the reasons noted before. And that's another question that pops up. You know, we get it sometimes, and we've gotten it across the country when we're working specifically in New Hampshire, when we're trying to work the hunting legalization up in New Hampshire, is that, okay, will other hunters be able to understand that hunting is going on out in the field while I'm out there? The answer is absolutely. You know, even at 140 decibels, that is incredibly loud. We're talking, you know, aircraft carrier jet bridge loud at 140 decibels. Knox and Owen and I go down to a hunt. Knox and Owen do it every year. I've done it a few times down at an 8,000 acre property in South Georgia. Knox, you know, several of the guys will fan out across the property. We're all hunting suppressed. Even in that instance, one person pulls the trigger, everybody else knows it, and we're all texting each other, who got one, right? The noise still carries, it's still incredibly loud. It's just not quite as dangerously loud as that 180 decibels unsuppressed. You're going to improve accuracy. Why are you going to improve accuracy? For a few reasons. One, the noise level is down. Also, the concussive effect is down. You can really tell that. We put on some classes. If you've ever been in a range, right, with even just ARs, forget about somebody with a muzzle brake, but if you've got 8 or 10 ARs across a firing range, everybody's pulling the trigger. I mean, that concussion, you feel it not just in your ears, you feel it in your body. And a suppressor is going to mitigate that to quite a good extent. It's also going to mitigate the recoil. And why is that? Because when I pull the trigger, now I've got a counteracting force. So I pull the trigger, the explosion happens, it's pushing the firearm back towards my shoulder. With the suppressor, you've got something capturing some of that gas as it pushes out. The gas hits the baffles of the suppressor. It creates a pulling effect that counteracts to some extent the recoil of the firearm. You're also going to reduce noise complaints at shooting ranges. We've hit the how to buy a suppressor. You know, again, very highly regulated. And despite having to go through all of these steps, the suppressor market is expanding, again, almost exponentially. You know, we've gone up to close to 4 million suppressors in circulation at this point, from 3 million just a year and a half ago. I mean, it's happening quickly, despite these issues. Another practical step here is, I don't think this has actually been discussed too much. ATF's e-forms. This is in addition to Ben's changes to the first in, first out process at ATF. In December of 2021, ATF finally relaunched e-forms to allow for submission. Previous to this, the submission process was all paper, and it went through several steps, right? If I wanted to purchase a suppressor, even at one of the fancy kiosks that Silencer Shop makes, what they were doing on the back end was printing out an entire Form 4. They were affixing a check to it. That entire packet was mailed in bulk to a processing center. I want to say it used to be in Atlanta, something like that, where they would pull the check off that. The check would get mailed to somewhere else. It seemed like it was the Pacific Northwest, or, I'm going to get my details here wrong. But then that form was moving to West Virginia. I mean, it's like unbelievable. And this was until 2021 that, e-forms brought us into the 1990s. So like, we'll take it, and they figured out how to make that process work with 1990s technology. Like, I think even ATF would admit, like, the tech isn't exactly cutting edge, but it doesn't have to be that sophisticated when what you're really talking about is filling in basically PDFs and moving them around electronically rather than on paper. But with all these improvements, like I said, in January 2024, transfer times are incredibly low, and we want to help keep them there. This graph gives you a good explanation of where those transfer times sit. Let me just look at that. And that's in months, right? And now we're talking days for most people. The ASA, we like to joke that we are pro-choice when it comes to hearing protection type. So what do we do as ASA? As Knox mentioned before, ASA is a 501c6 organization. We're a trade association dedicated to advancing the rights of the suppressor manufacturer, distributor, and dealer community, as well as the suppressor owning public at large. Our goal and our stated goal since 2011 is to make suppressors legal across the country in all 50 states to both hunt with and to own. We have done a lot of work at the state level across the year. So in 2011, this is a map of where you could own and hunt with a suppressor. The hunting states have the little deer icon on there. Note again that Georgia is not one of those states back in 2011. That was Knox's impetus for forming the association. Fast forward to 2024, we were active and helped get laws passed in Minnesota, in Iowa, and in Vermont that legalized ownership of suppressors. And we helped get laws passed in nearly 24 states to make hunting with suppressors legal, such that there's now only one state in the country where you can own a suppressor, but you can't hunt with it, and that is Connecticut. We've done some work up there over the years, but we haven't been able to crack that state legislature yet for many reasons, but we're still after it. Which gets us to our next big push, right? So we spent a lot of time and effort trying to get suppressors legal at the state level through the legislative process. We got very close in Illinois back in 2015, 2016. Well, 2016, we were very close, one vote away from getting it there. We had at that time, there was a Republican governor of the state of Illinois, such that if we could have got it through the legislature, we felt very good about our chances of getting that legalization bill signed into law. We worked a lot in Massachusetts at the time when they also had a Republican governor. They no longer do. The new governor of Massachusetts was the former attorney general. She is about as pro-gun a politician as you're going to find. So we were coming up against, those tectonic shifts, realizing that getting legislation done at the state level was going to become, an increasingly narrow chance of success. With the decision that came down in Bruin a couple of years ago, we decided it was time to take action and move this fight to the courts and try to get federal courts to agree with our take that suppressors are, in fact, bearable arms and therefore covered by the Second Amendment, and such that a ban at the state level on their possession and ownership is unconstitutional. So how did we want to do that? What we did was file a case in the Seventh Circuit in the Southern District of Illinois. This is a case called Anderson v. Raoul. We helped file it in association with Silencer Shop, and what we're doing is challenging Illinois' flat-out ban on suppressor ownership. And we've got plans to also, we'd like to file this across 3 different circuits right now. Like I said, we're just in the 7th Circuit, but we are actively working on plans to get other cases put in. We recognize, look, there's a ton of litigation going on out there as courts grapple with the meaning of Bruin, and we want to make sure suppressors are included in that. We think we've got a good shot at winning, and I'll go through some of the overview of that case here before I take questions. And like I said, just because of the current political makeup of the 8 states where suppressors remain illegal, we think that, getting suppressors to be unequivocally brought under the Second Amendment's umbrella is the best way to do this in any sort of timely fashion. And it also helps. So it wasn't until 2020 that we, in the first 9 years that the association existed, we played a lot of offense. We were out pushing suppressor legalization in states where suppressors were banned or looked upon disfavorably. In 2020, we were faced with our first, we were forced into a defensive posture, and that was in the state of Virginia, where there was a bill that came up in 2020 after there had been a mass shooting in Virginia Beach. Again, this goes along with the theme of bad thing happens, bad laws try to get passed by state or federal legislatures. That bill would have banned suppressors in the state of Virginia. That would, we're dedicated to making sure we take no steps back. That's our highest order focus. Knox and Owen actually ended up renting an apartment down there for the entirety of the session, thanks to their work with help from the in-state groups and the NRA and other pro-Second Amendment groups, plus some missteps on the anti-gun side. That bill never made it anywhere. Luckily, Virginia now has a pro-gun governor, so we don't have to worry about Virginia, at least for another couple of years. But you never know, right? The suppressors are starting to become more and more of a target of the other side, the anti-gun side, and we want to make sure we don't have to play defense. Getting these under a constitutional umbrella would take care of that for us. So what is our general argument? Our argument is threefold, and we recognize that this is something of an uphill battle because, sure. Why is a good question. I haven't really been able to understand that, right? Why do they, I go back to why are they fighting on ARs when we know that the fact of the matter is that murders with the use of rifles, generally speaking, in America, you're looking at around 200 per year out of 15 to 17,000 firearm homicides every year. It's inexplicable to me that those are the ones they go after. You could get rid of those 200, and that's not just AR, that's not murders, homicides with AR-15 type assault, quote unquote, assault weapons. That's all long guns. You get rid of those and it doesn't have any statistically meaningful effect on the overall homicide rate. And yet that is their fixation. I think the other side doesn't like things that look scary. I think also they get to, their side has done a good job. The anti-gun side, excuse me, has done a good job of making ARs the boogeyman. They don't have to work that hard to make suppressors the boogeyman when the public perception, again, is that James Bond, these things are only useful for assassins. They make gunshots silent. Again, that marketing was just incredible. We should honestly put Hiram Percy Maxim up for marketer of the century, because that thing has just stuck in the public's mind despite the facts. Because they really don't have a great argument. The arguments they come up with, interestingly, so Vermont is the most, was it Vermont or Maine? Not Vermont, right? Vermont was one of the last states we legalized hunting with suppressors. And we first helped get that legalized in 2016. It had a 4 year sunset provision. So we had to go back up there and fight to get rid of that sunset provision. 2 years ago, when we went up there to extend it another year, the anti-gun side came up and argued that hunting with suppressors, allowing hunting of suppressors might increase domestic abuse. Kid you not. I mean, that was the argument. It's like, I don't know how to rebut that because I'm not sure how a suppressor comes into this equation, yet it did. They got it in there. Our sunset went, they extended the legalization of hunting for another year. There were in fact no such reports of domestic abuse involving a suppressor, and we got it, fully passed. But that is a great question. I don't really understand.
The only semi-cogent line thing on the domestic violence increase as a result of allowing to use and is that you can still hear yourself. But seriously, it was wild. It was one that we all scratched our head, and the committee chair was like, I don't know how to deal with this. They don't want to.
So that, that's the level of understanding we're dealing with at the state legislative level. So our argument as to why suppressors should be covered by the Second Amendment is a three-part argument. The first, our top tier argument is that what the state is banning is the conduct of possessing a firearm equipped with a suppressor, not just a suppressor. And why do we say that? Because that's the only time they're trying to regulate this type of equipment, right? It's a suppressor itself is an inert object. I'd have a hard time, even really bashing somebody with it. If you ever picked one up, they're pretty light, typically around a pound. You can get some heavy ones more than that, some light ones a little less than that. But the item itself is not, it's not that useful to commit violence. And so we think that if the Second Amendment is to mean anything, then arm must include not just complete firearms, but also component parts that function with the firearm. And any ban on a component part of a firearm should not be understood merely as a ban on that part, but a ban on firearms that function with that part. So again, if the state were to try and ban laser sights on guns, what they're not doing is banning laser pointers. You can still go buy a laser pointer. They're banning the use of a laser pointer with that firearm. Just like if they're trying to ban sights on a gun, they're not banning, a little U-shaped piece of metal with a stick up in the middle of it. They're banning putting that on a firearm, right? The actual piece itself is not, it's immaterial. In the alternate, we argue that suppressors, if in fact we did have to meet the burden of Bruin and show that, which we don't, but if we did, we could show that suppressors perform critical functions in the use of firearms for self-defense and other lawful purposes. And why is that? I foreshadowed that earlier, but again, suppressors have intrinsic advantages over personal protective equipment like earplugs or earmuffs. First, they protect other people, not just the shooter. So again, in that self-defense environment, I'm protecting not only my hearing, frankly, I'm protecting the criminal's hearing also, but also my family's hearing. Second, a firearm can be stored with a suppressor attached so that an individual's hearing is protected in the event that it is needed to repel a home invader, but there's no time to also locate earplugs and earmuffs. Again, I mean, in what real world context are you grabbing your earmuffs when you're going out to look for the bad guy that you hear rustling around in your house at 4 o'clock in the morning? And third, that suppressors offer additional important protections for individuals engaged in self-defense, such that in addition to dampening sound, suppressors reduce recoil, help reduce muzzle flinch, and allow greater control of firearm and improved accuracy. Right, so they are, in fact, useful tools for self-defense. And finally, that at the very least, suppressors must be protected by implication of the plain text of the Second Amendment, because suppressors facilitate the exercise of the Second Amendment right. So even if the court doesn't buy our first two arguments, we argue that suppressors should be analyzed similarly to how firing ranges are analyzed. Firing ranges not being, arms, but they're necessary by implication. You can't ban firearms, and Azell is the case on point that deals with this.
Have you considered an originalist tax, under which you would analyze how the firearms were sounding? And maybe other than facts spin up, you could argue that firearms have gotten louder, that would surprise me, given their increased power, and therefore somehow to maintain parity over the spin, suppressors are appropriate.
Can you summarize that just for the, since it's now coming out of my computer?
Yes, so that was a great question. So the question is, have we analyzed whether we could make an originalist argument that firearms at the founding were, potentially quieter than firearms are currently, such that suppressors would, essentially keep that even? Honestly, we hadn't, but that's a great point. We'll absolutely take that under advisement.
Michael, Heller puts bows and arrows as arms. That was quite well. And the other thing I think about is 22 rimfire is pretty quiet compared to 30-06. Do they require us to use 30-06 with the 22 rimfire? Or how about the fact that the longer the barrel, the quieter the shot's going to be? So we can only have short barrels. I mean, there's no end to the absurdities you could think of.
And that really is, that's a great point. And I meant to hit that when I talked about the how loud suppressors are generally and relatively, right? The quietest you're really going to get a 22 long rifle suppressed is still 110 decibels, more or less. So people run around saying, we'll get this argument sometimes and, YouTube, et cetera. Well, I've got a 22 long rifle, it's suppressed, that thing is silent. I mean, it's like relatively quiet. However, 110 decibels is, ambulance siren level. I would ever accuse an ambulance siren of being quiet, but you're exactly right. Yeah, the conduct being banned is quieting, making a gunshot quieter. That might end. I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up in one of our arguments here going forward. That's a great point.
Two things.
Sir.
In your discussion of home defense, you left out muzzle flash, because without a suppressor, the muzzle flash will blind you, totally destroying your ability to continue with effective muzzle home defense. Second, on silence, in 1803 and 4, the Lewis and Clark expedition took along a Girardoni repeater. It was an air rifle, and it was the same weapon that had been issued to the Austrian army, and I had 1,000 what we call snipers now, with the sharpshooters. And it fired its projectile at about 500 feet per second. So it was distinctly subsonic, and it allowed them to remain hidden. The source of the fire was not known. So you functionally have the search for a quiet arm. The reason it fell out of favor was the complexity of the weapon. But you had that search at the founding. So that goes to the originalist question, right?
I love all that. I'm not sure I could capture that to explain to the audience, but essentially Lewis and Clark firearm. What'd you call it?
It's a Girardoni repeater.
Girardoni repeater, right? So at 500 feet per second, I imagine it wasn't packing that much stopping power.
42 caliber ball.
It's big.
At 500 feet per second.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, and I'm being asked to take an audience.
How responsible.
Okay, so the question posed is why not make the argument that threaded barrels are irrelevant within the scope of the Second Amendment? I think we would make that argument. We haven't gone after, we've done some lobbying when it comes to some of these AR bans, which make the application of suppressors a lot more difficult, at least with rifles or with semi-automatic rifles. We just haven't taken the threaded barrel question into our lawsuit. We're trying to keep it a little tighter than that, just on the actual ban, but that is a great point. Sir.
So I'm an editor with Suppressor magazine. We had an author actually submit one of his articles, and he talks a lot about it. When you don't think the sound, the hearing being during home defenses. Another side of it's like the after. When you're talking to the police or being interrogated, they just hear the sound and that. Who's against you? Brings that.
You make a great point. And so the question and comment there was essentially that you got both the flash as an issue and the noise that happens, but also the after effects of the noise on your ability to interact with police after a home defense scenario. And that is a great point. I mean, that is a serious downside. Not only is your adrenaline up, not only are you sort of in a hyper aware state, but all of a sudden you've lost a lot of the sense of hearing when you're being likely questioned. Perhaps you answer a question that you wouldn't otherwise answer, because as we know, it is not advisable to speak that much in that scenario without an attorney present, if at all, frankly. But that's a subject of another session.
I was wondering in your research, how many crimes have you found in total or a year? Bona fide crime, not a paperwork crime, a possession crime, but a crime where somebody shot somebody with a firearm equipped with a suppressor.
So the question was, how often are suppressors used in crime aside from the possession crime of an unregistered silencer? And that is a great question. It's very close to a zero number. It's not a zero number, but it is very close to a zero number. They're not, if you think about a suppressor and you think about a criminal, they're not very helpful to a criminal, because what is a criminal typically trying to do? They're trying to conceal their firearm. If I've got a typical Glock handgun and I affix a suppressor to it, I'm more or less doubling the length of this item, making it much less concealable. And I'm also not, there's practical reasons. I think, to my mind, that's the reason they're often not used. There's just not much of a practical application for your everyday criminal, but it's a close to zero number. I could ask Ben if he's aware of sort of the stats there, but there's been papers where even ATF cops and Justice Department asserts that they're just not used in crimes very often. And I'll note there also, so this came up in an interview we were doing with the press a few weeks ago. The question was posed, since we're sitting here on this exponential increase in civilian firearms ownership, do we expect that low number of crimes to increase? And the fact of the matter is, like I said, we've added 1 million suppressors to the civilian stock in the last couple of years. That number stays close to zero. It's not really picking up. They're just not used often in crimes. Any other questions, sir?
So change gears real quick to talk about strategic review. So the courts, based on the current composition, until we get a new crop of jurists in, and because the possible threat of acting in the Supreme Court, and certain people win. What is your group's objective on the ground? Because people love to take certain split cases and things like that. And Texas is obviously working on to nullify by making suppressors legal that were made in Texas, legal in Texas. So assuming we get a state where you have an attorney general who is going to defend its citizens, and you have the governor doing that. Are you guys developing that kind of legislative strategy on the ground in different states to effectively work different angles instead of just relying on the arbitrary dictates of the black world?
So the question posed is, what are we doing to, you know, essentially get our case up to the Supreme Court in light of, is that really the?
Rebellious and see what we can do on the states.
Sure. So some of the downside, we are, so with respect to our challenge to the constitutionality of bans, which I want to distinguish from challenges to the NFA itself, which is not something we're involved with at this time. But I've loved some of the interesting ideas and theories put forth on that subject. With respect to just challenging the constitutionality of bans, it is our intention, you know, look, we'd like to file these suits and win them across several different circuits and win, you know, that way. However, we recognize that our likelihood of success within the circuit courts, you know, to go 100% is close to zero. What's more likely is either we, you know, we'd like to think that we could get a circuit split, right? Win in one circuit, lose in another, and get that up to the Supreme Court. And we think, you know, that is our general overall strategy. The problem is we don't have a ton of super friendly states in the circuits we're working. Just because of the geography of the circuit courts. So we can't go to Texas because Texas doesn't have a suppressor ban that we could challenge. And we wouldn't want to ask them to create such ban for this purpose either, because the people of Texas like their suppressors.
Making suppressors legal in a state. So Kansas attempted to do this term, and some people paid the price. But if there is a state and you get the ducks in a line, is that something you guys would do as an organization?
It's not something we've gone with currently, and there's some reasons behind that. You know, we look at what happened in Kansas, and I think you put it mildly when you said it was not executed well, right? I mean, it got some well-meaning individuals prosecuted for some very serious crimes, and they're paying very dearly for that. I think Texas implemented it a little bit more intelligently, but even then, the word doesn't get out to people, to your general public, like that there's this, technically the law doesn't go into effect in Texas unless X and Y happens, you know, like they see the headline and they think all of a sudden, bam, the NFA doesn't apply to me in the state of Texas. And that's just not how the jurisprudence works. And so we've not gone down that route at this time, but we do monitor that very closely. So that is an excellent question. I've got a question from the online audience that says, knowing nothing about this area of law, could there be a legal argument about cruel and unusual punishment given the health damage, hearing loss, caused by using a firearm in self-defense versus the potential health damage of not confronting a home intruder? Without a suppressor, the gun owner is forced to weigh which harm risk is greater in the moment. I mean, that's a great point. I don't know my cruel and unusual punishment constitutional jurisprudence that well, but there are certainly health arguments that we are making and that we would like to develop even further here. Because like I said, what these states are banning is the protection of your hearing. They're not banning shooting. The shooting is just louder in Illinois, in New York, and California than it is in Colorado and Arizona and Georgia. And we hope to fix that.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
And thanks to everyone online who was bearing with us for our at least only technical difficulty of the day. Well, I'm gonna close it.